Okay, here we are.
Hi, Megan.
It's so good to see you. I feel like I did this all as an excuse to get to talk
Uh,
to you.
well, I'm going to try to do a slightly hostly official thing before we degenerate into just all the conversation we're so wanting to have. I'm Jonathan Lethem. I'm the host and interlocutor here to help welcome and congratulate Megan on the publication of The Turnout, your brand new novel, which you're sort of on a virtual book tour for right now. And Megan and I have been each other's readers and kind of have had glancing friends in common and stuff for quite a while. But this is really a first chance for us to share some talk together. So you'll see us enjoying this long overdue encounter. I also want to thank Barnes and Noble, of course, for hosting us today, and say that I have the benefit in talking to Megan and asking her questions on behalf of the audience. I have the benefit of a wonderful long list of questions that were sent in advance by readers who are now part of this chat. And so that means that there won't be real-time question asking, but that I'll have some questions from some of you, and I apologize in advance. Of course, there's way too many good ones for me to get to them all, but I'll feed them in when I see good opportunities, and especially towards the end, I'll make sure I am looking at it more and more. But I'm going to begin with some things I want to ask you, some of them easy and silly softball things. I haven't been looking at your publicity to this point, so you'll have to excuse me if I hit some really obvious ones. But on a need to know basis, were you ever in the Nutcracker, and what was your part?
Oh gosh, I wish I did take ballet for 2 years at the Casale School of Dance, which was a strip mall ballet studio in suburban Detroit. And I was not a natural dancer, let's just say, but I even at that age, I was always going to see the Nutcracker, and it did have that enchanting quality to me. And the dance studio I went to was run by two sisters, as is the case with the Turnout. In this case, they were twins. I was just saying to someone, that's why you can't use real life, because it's too good. You have twin ballet dancers that run a studio. But they were really glamorous to me and to all of the students, and very exotic. So we would just speculate incessantly about their love lives, were they rivals with each other, and I think somehow that was in the back of my brain, and eventually came to the fore. But the Nutcracker has remained a constant. I still go every year.
So great. Well, I should say I've only seen the Nutcracker as an adult. I never saw it when I was a child, but I've taken my own kids to a production of it that comes to our town every year, and is a big school trip. And so I've been the parent taking boys to see the Nutcracker. Like 4 out of 5 years at one point there was this run. And so I sort of memorized it, and it gets in your head. It's got a very weird obsessive quality, and explaining why it's the way it is to kids who haven't seen very many ballets and just don't have any context for it was strange. But reading your book while being on the beach, I'm in Maine, and spending as many days as I can hanging out, reading on the beach, and sometimes going into the ocean. But some kayakers went by one day, and one of them was wearing this big floppy hat, and it was just distant enough that I hallucinated strongly that it was a mouse head. And I was like, why is that kayaker wearing a giant mouse head? What does it mean? It really like triggered some, archetypal terror.
Yes, it's full of that. I like a fairy tale. It is based on a fairy tale. It has these images that linger, and these oddnesses that sort of the deeper you go into it. A lot of that is usually glossed over in the ballet production, but I think it's still in there. I think that's one of the reasons it sticks with us, because we do sense these sort of darker, stranger undercurrents in it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so I'm going to widen the context a little bit and talk about the Turnout for just a moment, as if no one knows you or your work or this book at all. And just, so Megan is a specialist in what I would call like a superheated noir atmosphere, and bringing that to traditionally, in many cases, traditionally feminine milieu. right? This is kind of a signature now for you. Cheerleaders are one of the obvious examples. And I mean, it's not as though you're the first woman to write in a noir style. There are really important, exciting precedents, and I want to talk with you about some of them, like Patricia Highsmith and Dorothy Hughes. But you are the contemporary, version of this, and you seem to go deeper and deeper. And so it almost seems like a inevitable. I could never have predicted it, that you would pick ballet, like it's ballet noir. It's a really unexpected combination, but then again, seems completely native in the way you fuse these elements together. Of course, there's a Gothic element. There's an old European element. There's this milieu with a very mysterious kind of traditions and controls around it, and people who are overinvested in something.
Yeah.
For very good noir. And of course, it's, even though it's something that children are involved in your book and in reality, it also has sexual melodrama lurking in its DNA. That possibility of fetish and obsession is very much there. So it's a masterful book. I'm really thrilled to be talking with you about it. And so the thing that I first thought about, which struck me so distinctly, was how you managed to balance two different kinds of things that can be characteristic of noir or crime novels. And I specify crime novels as opposed to mystery novels. Mystery, I just for my purposes, is sort of like there's a detective and there are clues, right, and a solution, and the reader tries to beat the detective and the writer to the answer before the end, and identify. It's like Agatha Christie is the archetype. Crime novels are novels where even if a detective or investigator or policeman appears at some points, they're driven by the criminal protagonists, the dark machinations, the secrets. And noir is a crime novel or a crime story where things are going to work out terribly, where it's not going to be good.
Yeah.
And fate, a heavy sense of the fate, the darkness of human fate, is also suffusing this crime story. So you, I think, are a real crime novelist and a real noir novelist. And one of the things that strikes me about the tradition, both in film and in novels, is that on the one hand, these things are such fables. They're so archetypal. They're fables of human doom. And so they thrive on a kind of a overheated, exaggerated atmosphere, and one that is timeless, that feels almost like it is a kind of a fairy tale, dark fairy tale. And on the other hand, the crime novel tradition, I think, is a place where American filmmakers and novelists often go to do something that they aren't invited to do elsewhere, which is to talk about realms of work and the way the world works and the way class works, to show people in different milieus, different professions, actually doing what they do. Often when you read it, like a Elmore Leonard novel or a Stanley Ellen novel, you find yourself unexpectedly drawn into the description of how a teller at a bank goes through his day, let's say, because the bank is to be robbed, or whatever it is. But John D. MacDonald specialized in this as well. You would really feel like you'd learn something about the way society operates. And it's hard for novelists to find chances to do this work of describing ordinary life. But the crime novel really invites it. And so here's a great example. You've done it in the Turnout. The whole thing reads like a kind of ridiculous from the very beginning, like it fits with the ballet milieu. It's something like that Darren Aronofsky book, Black Swan, was that the name of it? Or The Red Shoes, the Colin Pressburger novel of our movie rather of these doomed red shoes, that fate the ballet dancer to the horrible result. And at the same time, we're seeing the operation of a dance studio and the production of the annual Nutcracker, which is it's a really behind the scenes kind of picture. And there's this, not spoiler because he walks in very quickly. Yeah. There's this contractor, and one of the parts of this book was so prosaic Wonderful is it's like, oh no, a contractor. This isn't going to be good. He's tearing a hole in their wall. This isn't going to work out. It's so ordinary, you know. So would you talk about combining these two different demands, I think, of the form?
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me because those are the two things I love. I mean, I really do love the heightened and expressive hot house feeling of noir, where everything is pitched high, and it's these primal emotions of sort of lust and greed and revenge. But the thing I love about crime novels is just what you're saying. It's James M. Cain is one that comes to mind, because when you read A Postman, you learn all about running a diner, and when you watch Double Indemnity or read it, you learn all about the insurance industry. And so that is so fascinating to me. It's sort of what makes the crime novel. I mean, there's a claim that it sort of took the place of the social novel, that there isn't really a social novel in America the way there used to be, that's sort of the place for it. So both of those things are my fascination, and kind of ramming them together. It does feel like they go, because they work in film noir. So I think there is that these are about real people's lives, the things they're concerned about, their rent, their abusive husband, their job, their employers treating them badly, and then they're pushed into a corner, and then everything gets to this sort of noir pitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, all in my head. Exactly.
I was characterizing your book as I was when I wasn't looking up at the mouse head guy in the kayak, when I was reading it, and I was turning the pages, and I was so excited, and my partner said, what is it? What's happening? What's it doing? And I said, Megan has the capacity to take a level of heat and implication and, frankly, kind of sexual innuendo, the risk of dangerous sexuality. It's like they're from page one, and it just stays at this top level. And the comparison I reached for was, I said, it's like if you see a film noir and the cinematographer never stops making archetypal images. Every scene, every shot looks like the poster for the film, like the shadows are across the faces, and the composition is 50% dark, and then someone emerges from the shadows, and you're like, oh, I get it. Every shot's, it's not just like the film works in this style, it's like every shot works in this style. And that's how you write, so that you're never not delivering the doom and also the sensuality.
Yeah, it was. I was so interested in in some ways it's sort of, they never leave, these dancers, grew up in their family house and never really left it. And this is their mother's school, so the studio. So almost the entire novel, really, I didn't realize till I was very hurt, it all takes place in those two places. Mm-hmm. So that creates this, they just felt like living things to me, I guess, in that Gothic way that both those structures did. And then the sort of pressure of that. And then these are dancers. So they're surrounded by mirrors, and they're looking at their bodies all day. And they're looking at, the body's supposed to always look so beautiful. And I started to get interested in how it would take the form of, there is a rather intense sexual affair in the book. And how upsetting that is to Darrow's, the older sister. This isn't a spoiler, this is very early on, is because the body is supposed to always look beautiful. And she's sort of horrified by this sort of sexuality pressed up close to her in this really aggressive way, when she sort of operates it as a much more sort of remote and distanced bit of artifice. So that all was sort of bubbling in my head too.
Well, so while we're in this uncomfortable but compelling area of the bodies, I also was struck that this book is distinctly about the middle-aged body. It's about people who are very conscious of their physical selves, who are not necessarily what they once were. And there's the pain I mean, even just physical pain of managing old injuries, things that creep up upon one in middle age, whether you've been a dancer or not, and that and you're interrogating this quite specifically, but it doesn't exclude anyone from an ongoing sensuality either.
Right. Yeah, I did because this is so funny. I rarely. I know not someone who goes on Amazon, reads my reviews, or goes on Goodreads. I have a healthy respect for my sanity, and I want to keep it. But someone did tell me once that my characters are always so beautiful, and this contractor, I wanted him to be like one of those. They're just a regular person you could come upon in real life. And this contractor, Derek, he's in his 50s. He's sort of overweight. He's sort of he's sort of a big mouth guy. He's not what would consider, for instance, this sort of dashing William Holden like character that we might see in noir. But and then it turned out I don't know, to me it felt much sexier that this guy would become this sort of tantalizing figure in the book, which he does early on, and that all these aesthetics would have to be reconsidered in light of that. So it was so fun to write him. I had to cut out, really like lots of extra stuff about just him doing whatever he wanted. Just really like to take on that. I like to wear the mask of Derek the contractor because
and he's subject to. I mean, this is where I have to just make sure I really don't ruin the fun for anyone, but he's subject to such unexpected reversals. And I mean, what you do reminds me of Highsmith very specifically in that the cast is really quite limited of who might be involved, and that the reader's going to object if some new person is involved suddenly that explains or changes the story. Once you've limited the cast, and so then you're staring at this group, and you're like, how do these four essentially, where there's sort of a dangling fifth person who's of interest, how can they generate what a story is going to need? And of course, then everything turns in so many different ways, and they all become, different than you expect, and their fates change so much, and it's so satisfying because the spaces and the cast are both quite controlled and limited.
Yeah, I'm so glad it was the challenge. It's always the challenge when, it's not a mystery. So it's not like it has to be, in that way. I mean, that would be really hard to do a mystery where you only have three or four suspects, for instance, but you're still dealing with a limited number. But I have to admit, this is a tendency of mine. I really tend to, I think it's watching all those B movies as a kid. I really like the few sets, the thing where you can actually spot a woman, an actress wearing the same dress you just saw her wear in another movie. I really like that sort of stripped down style. So then everything else can be very big because you're dealing with very, very small. I'm one of those people that when I read most books, I have to put the names of the characters at the front so I can remember who's who. And you would never have to do that with my books.
That's great. Well, so I'm alluding to film so much, I wanted to talk to you about Echoes. I mean, when I talk about that superheated style, one of the filmmakers who I suspect we have in common is Nicholas Ray, who, reaches a pitch within the first scene and then stays there where every shot and every scene is on fire. And when he works in black and white, it's the noir style. When he works in Technicolor, it's like, it's almost psychedelic in something like Rebel Without a Cause. And he also likes to limit circumstances. There's that great Bogart movie, In a Lonely Place, which basically all happens in a courtyard. It's the space across which Gloria Graham and Humphrey Bogart meet eyes, and they just never leave the courtyard. They just go back and forth from one apartment to the next.
Yes, we've talked about, I love that movie and I know you love it too. And I've never been to, those apartments are still there. And have you been there?
I haven't. I've always heard that it's possible to visit them. Yeah,
because they are so iconic. And Ray himself He was recreating an apartment complex he had lived in, and it has that. And of course, he cast Gloria Graham, his soon-to-be ex-wife, as the romantic. There's so much great stuff about that makes it charged. What's on screen is charged, and what's off screen is supercharged. And another one of my favorites of his is Johnny Guitar, because it's like, I mean, these are all different genres. There's In a Lonely Place is sort of Hollywood suspense, I suppose, if you can even call it that. And teen melodrama with Rebel Cause, and Johnny Guitar's a Western, but they all seem like his movies because they're really about that mood and tone. And I think I've always been drawn to that kind of leaning in. And I don't have to tell you about playing with genre, but I just love that, because at heart they are the same. The crime novel comes from the Western in many ways. So yeah, all that stuff is always humming in my head. And I know this must be the same for you too, but visuals from stuff I watched as a kid is always just coming at me when I'm writing.
That's great. Well, so I'm going to start looking at these questions very shortly, because I want to represent the audience's wonderful attention here as well. But I have one more question that comes straight from me, and this is an influence question, and I don't know the answer. I'm really wondering whether it was in your head or not. But one thing that this book evoked for me was Shirley Jackson's "We Have Always Lived in the Castle," because of the sisters and their cloistered quality. Yeah. And I wondered if that crossed your mind.
Yeah.
And also the feeling of an interloper, how big it is when someone breaks into that space.
Yeah, and there are other connections, no spoiler, but I didn't realize till after. I had not thought it was a conscious influence, but it is one of my favorite books of all time. I've read it.
It's a beautiful book. Yeah.
These 5 times. And so it was really only later that I realized how close it was, because I was realizing I was trying to think of other books that had solved certain problems with, and are so voicey. I mean, anyone who only knows Shirley Jackson because of The Lottery is in for a great treat to discover her novels. And they are wonderful. But to me, that's just like a peak book. But yes, it's like a hothouse atmosphere, a family, outsiders, and you don't know what's more dangerous, what's outside or what's inside.
I think that's right. And the sense that the answer might lie in the past, that something happened before the book that's that no one can get rid of,
Exactly.
Well, I love when that happens. I once completely unconsciously, I thought I was paying tribute to one set of influences, and I did a rewrite of E.M. Forster's Passage to India with Girl and Landscape. I thought I was rewriting a John Ford Western, and then it turned out all my plot points came from Passage to India. So,
oh my God.
It's good when you feel your subconscious.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, so with apologies, because there's so many great questions, and I'm not going to represent them all, but I'm going to jump to the ones that are most surprising and specific for me. So one that's a great question is, what was the hardest scene for you to write in the Turnout?
Oh, it's always the same scene. It's always the scene when there's leading up to an act of violence, and there's a couple acts of violence in this book, but there's the first one, and it's just because you have to make, you're just trying to get, for it to work, you have to get everything moving toward, it has to feel, I mean, this is again the noir thing, it has to feel inexorable, right? And it has to feel, I don't know, that you're sort of so caught up in it that you can't quite see what's coming, something, but all those things that I always loved as a reader and a watcher is sort of when you feel your sort of heart, ratcheting up. And it's so hard to do that when, of course, as the writer, what's happening, you're pulling all the strings and you're trying to sort of, it's like an incantation, trying to create that state for the person reading it. So it's just really, they're always the hardest, and I always feel kind of trapped in them, where I'm working on that scene for days and days and days. And each morning it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to go back into that room, or that, so those are always the hardest.
Great. Thank you.
It
So
was
I'm
fun too.
going to keep at these questions. The ones that I really don't know what you're going to say are exciting to me. And this is an interesting one, I think. You know, you and I have already spoken about film, and you talk about watching, and it's obvious to me that you're like me. You look at a lot of fiction film, whether they're new ones or old ones. But this is a question that, a lot of people are very captivated these days by crime documentaries, news stories, Dateline, Buried in the Backyard, 2020. And so this question is, do you absorb a lot of documentary and news accounts and true crime, these amazing, enthralling true crime documentaries on cable TV? That's the wrong word for it anymore, but I'm old. Do you find it inspiring or hindering to absorb these kinds of accounts?
I have to admit, I'm a complete glutton for it. I watch and read it all. I have since I was a kid with the spin rack at the grocery store. I would always buy the paperback ones, and I have lots of opinions about the ones that I think work and don't, the ones that are exploitive, ones that aren't. But this book in particular was sort of not inspired by a crime itself, but the response to a true crime podcast, which is that podcast Dirty John, which was a California story and became a TV show, but it was about this sort of serial con artist who was romancing and terrorizing these women. And it was a very popular podcast. And I kept seeing these responses to it in the comments that you're never supposed to read, but the comments were, it was a lot of women were very angry, not at the guy who had done these things, including murder, but at the women how could they be so stupid to fall for this guy? And I was so puzzled. It felt like to me, it felt like a warding off. This could never happen to me because you must be dumb and I am not, or something superstitious. I couldn't figure it out. So in this isn't a spoiler either, but that dynamic plays out between the two sisters because I was so interested in that, about how women judge other women's. It's almost like you're telling on us, you're making us look bad kind of feeling. And then, I always think with those comments, this is true, my own comments, it's always based on my own, I'm projecting some kind of issues of my own. And so I really wanted to have that, explore that in it. So even when it's not in there, true crime does linger.
Excellent. So I'm really interested in all the different people who really want to hear you talk about research, and where at what point in your process do you immerse yourself in research? Is it all before the writing begins, or do you research as you write fiction? How does it come in, and what is your process? There are 3 or 4 questions that really.
Yeah, it's early and intensive. I love that part of it. I only could write about something that I wanted to know endlessly more about. And I'm trying to get just the kind of things you were talking about, the nitty gritty of it. So there's a lot of ways we see culturally ballet and view it, but there's not really what it's like to actually be a dancer or to be in the studio, or so I read a ton of ballet memoirs and nonfiction books about the Nutcracker, and I read the E.J. Halfman Nutcracker, and I read analysis of the E.J. Halfman Nutcracker. I always read a little Freud in there, and I watched a lot of dance, and this is one of the benefits of social media, is that you can go on YouTube and see dance studio rehearsals. You can see anything, and it was really when I started to watch these videos that dancers would show of preparing their point shoes. And there's thousands of them, and they all have their own ritual and technique, and they're very wedded to it. And that kind of stuff, that's when I know I have something that I can really sink deep into. And then I try to put it away and start writing. And then I try to only go back if there's something I need to fill in. But it's trying to find enough that I can write for days on end without having to check too much, it's so that you can let it kind of flow. Otherwise, I would just be writing another dissertation, this time on point shoe technique.
I know that's a marvelous page in your book. It's one of those places where you sell it, that idea that the point shoes are these sort of barbaric but very intimate objects that everyone has to cultivate their own relationship to. And even specifically, it's like, when I was a kid, if you got a new baseball glove, you had to break it in, and people would talk about finding a ball inside of it and running the car over the glove. And I was like, oh, this is like that.
It is. I remember my brother.
Much more painful.
Much more painful. It was smarter, yes. But that is another part of it, is how much the pain was connected to the pleasure and the exhilaration, which I always find so fascinating, and how you can't separate them, because these are the instruments of torture that they are like getting exactly right to torture them in just the right way. Mm-hmm. And then they throw them away immediately afterward, which I love too. It's perfect.
Wow. So I'm going to add to the question about research, because you talked about your reading and your watching, and I'm curious, because this is something that very recently changed for me. Up until just what I'm working on now, I would have always said I avoid, almost like the plague, getting into conversations with real people. I'm shy about that. Yeah. And I just changed that out of necessity. But it sounds like what you didn't do, or you haven't mentioned, is going and haunting ballet studios or talking to teachers or former dancers. Is that a decision that you made, or am I wrong, or what?
No, you're not. I mean, I did very late on. I mean, I've done this different stages, but in this case, at the end, I had a ballet dancer read the entire thing and give me notes and talk about stuff, and she gave me some great additional details. But if it were, I mean, there would be ways, if this were not a ballet school or a studio, if this were about like the New York City Ballet, I think I would have had to, and I do go to the ballet, but like you, I'm shy, and there's so much, it's really the things they won't tell you, I find, that are the things that I want to know, and I sort of back channels get that. But occasionally I had a book set in a science lab, and I didn't even know what scientists do when they were standing there. So I had to talk to someone very early, because there's no book that will help you with that. But with ballet, there is a lot, and there's some, Gelsey Kirkland, there's some wonderful ballet memoirs that really get into the nitty gritty and are kind of beautiful too. But someday I'm going to have to do it.
Right. Okay, so I'm sort of batching the questions here as I see the time ticking away. There are a number of people, and because we haven't had the chance of talking before, I don't know your answers to this. There are a number of people who really want to hear about your beginnings. What made you set out? What made you believe you could be a writer? What made you first realize you loved being a writer? These are different versions of similar inquiries. And I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely fell into it. I still pause when someone asks what I do. I was going to be a professor. I went to graduate school. I wrote my dissertation on hard-boiled fiction and film noir, and therefore read like 400 hard-boiled fiction novels in a row and watched countless movies. I mean, I'd already seen most of the movies, but I fell in love with Raymond Chandler and James M. Cain and Chester Himes. And so I was trying to write the dissertation, and it's really hard to write a dissertation. So I started to write what became my first novel on the side. And it was really about wanting to walk into a film noir or a Raymond Chandler novel. So it was about like a school teacher, a female school teacher who gets into trouble in 1950s LA. And it was really just a wish fulfillment fantasy. But it ended up working out, and then I just haven't been able to stop since then. So I don't know why I wouldn't, but I didn't feel like I could say I'm going to be a writer. It had to come through the back door, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but this kind of voracious, immersive reading is usually, one joke I sometimes make is that all fiction is fan fiction.
Yes, really so.
The people who aren't reading in that way and aren't just sort of drunk on some form of storytelling, nothing can make you a writer except that, really.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So, which turns to another part of these questions that I'm going to put a couple of them together. because it is endlessly interesting, and I also haven't heard you talk about your reading life enough. What are some of your favorite underappreciated crime novelists? Who do you recommend who's currently a practitioner? What are you excited about right now? All of these things.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, we're all the heirs of Chandler and Hammett, so we know that.
That's right. That's right. And Highsmith, of course, but everyone loves Highsmith. But I wanted to say, I don't think people read. Everyone reads Ripley, and those are wonderful. But
Yeah, the non-Ripley.
Yeah.
The non-Ripley Highsmiths, I agree.
You know,
Do you know the one, A Dog's Ransom?
Yes.
Oh my God, that is the darkest.
The Blunderer is great. Deep Water. So but you had mentioned Dorothy B. Hughes, and she is she wrote the novel In a Lonely Place that the film is based on. A lot of people know the film, though not even that many people still know the film. I'm always surprised, but I think that is one of the great American crime novels, and it's just back in print the last few years, and I think she's incredible. And Chester Himes still isn't talked about enough, but I think those books feel so prescient today.
They're incredible. Yeah.
The Coffin Ed and Gravedigger Jones series and they talk about Baroque and expression. They get wilder and wilder as the series goes on, as it starts in early 60s or late 50s and Harlem and moves into the 70s. So huge cultural changes. So those are ones that I adore and go back to. There's some stuff I'm reading now that's great. I love S.A. Cosby's series, is his debut novel last year. And this year's Razorblade Tears, Blacktop Wasteland and Razorblade Tears. I think he's great. I'm a big fan of William Boyle, who Jonathan, you might love his stuff. He's a Brooklyn native, but he writes these sort of crime melodramas that are set in Brooklyn, and they're so wonderful. But I do also read a lot of other stuff. I read a lot of nonfiction. I'm a sucker for books about Hollywood, so I'm almost always reading one of those as well. So I try to across genre, which I know is the case for you too.
You know this book that's just come out? It's Matthew Spector. It's called Always Crashing in the Same Car.
I just ordered that.
Oh, you're gonna love it. It's portraits of kind of failed figures in the history of Hollywood, writers and actors, and people who were achieved a certain amount and then kind of tapered off or hit a fork in the road, and it catches that underbelly aspect of the Los Angeles dream in the most extraordinary way. And it's got a hard-boiled style of its own. Or it's that place where the romantic style, like F. Scott Fitzgerald, gives way to the hard-boiled style, which I think is the romanticism in the hard-boiled writers is the secret ingredient.
I think so, and I think it's the neglected part. I think it's the people. It's really in. You can't read a page of. You can't read a page of Elroy without feeling the weight of that, and that's sort of, I think, considered sort of gritty and dark, but there is such a sheen of complicated glamour to all of it, which has really always been what I am drawn to. Bleak is fine too, though, but those versions. Horace McCoy is another writer I love. He's amazing. He's really great.
Those are incredible books, and the film of They Shoot Horses, Don't They is also really underappreciated, great, ferociously dark novel. And it's also one of those milieu novels. It gives testament to the fact that dance marathons were like a thing, that this is a real part of the Depression era culture where that people would go and spend time doing this really horrible kind of torment, and then watch other people doing this torment.
Yes, the audience. That book and that movie. The Gloria, the main character in that, is one of the great female characters in noir to me. She's incredible and one tough customer. That's a fact. I wish all his books were back in print.
So talk to us about to wind up about what you're planning to do next, whether you're doing it already, what aspirations you have for kinds of books or or milieus that you haven't unveiled at this point?
Yes, I've been sort of, speaking of writers losing their soul to Hollywood, I've been doing a lot of TV work the past year, but I'm pretty excited about it. I'm working on a feature with Scott Frank, who has done Queen's Gambit, and it's an adaptation of Nabokov's Laughter in the Dark. So which is noir.
That's his, that one and Despair are his two real crime stories. I mean, a lot of them are crime stories, but those are the noirs. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that has been really fun. So, and I am working on a project with George Pelecanos based on a John D. MacDonald novel for HBO. So a standalone, one of the standalone.
One of the non. I mean, it's true for a number of people, like Highsmith with Ripley or Simenon, that what gets overlooked are the standalone books, and those John MacDonald working without his detective character is an incredible novelist, and again, always so fierce and but also he's so interested in what people do, like the dailiness of them.
Yes.
The workplace aspect of them.
Absolutely.
How problems get solved in real situations, in a boatyard or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and people may only know him from Cape Fear, the movies, but which is a great standalone of his, but they're all little gems and so atmospheric, and he's great. So that's fun to talk. So
those are good things to be working on, and you have to say hi to George Pelecanos for me. I haven't talked to him in a long while, but what a great guy he is. But I hope you both get back to novels too. You have to write novels.
Yeah, I am. And I'm glad to hear you're deep into something that you have to talk to people about, though.
Yes, I'm returning to Brooklyn in the sort of 70s, 80s, the gentrification and the melodrama of crime and race in the neighborhood where I grew up, which, I wrote earlier books about it, but I was very reliant on my own memories or on a small number of confidants, people I was already in touch with. But this time I realized to do it right, I had to go wider. And so it's almost got an oral historical component where I'm just soliciting information from lots of people who were adjacent to that world and who I knew at least slightly, but I've had to look them up. And so it's like I've turned myself into a self-ethnographer of some kind.
Or a gumshoe.
I'm writing my dissertation finally.
There you go. It was coming. But that sounds amazing. And it sounds like a great moment for it. And you got to get those stories from people while we can.
It was weird. Pandemic was a time when people were reflecting, and it was, although I couldn't go and interview in person, which felt at first like I was losing something, I would be on Zoom with people or just on a phone call. And it was like I turned the faucet on, because I think something about being forced into ourselves by the quarantine made people ready to remember a lot of things. And it made me ready to go there too.
Oh, I can't wait for that. Amazing.
Oh, Megan, congratulations again. Everybody get yourselves a copy of the Turnout. And thanks again to Barnes & Noble for giving us this chance to talk and hang out.
Definitely. And hope to see you in real life.
It'll happen.
On the other end. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye now.